It is late April, 1882, and John Henry, Doc Holliday, and Dan Tipton have just arrived in Trinidad, Colorado, after fleeing Arizona Territory into New Mexico, and then onto Colorado. Holliday and Tipton have recently separated from a larger group of men that included Holliday's friend Wyatt Earp. Some of those men are wanted for murder in Tucson. On March 18, 1882, Wyatt Earp's younger brother, Morgan, was assassinated while playing billiards in Tombstone, Arizona Territory, setting off a chain of events that would come to be known as the Vendetta Ride. Over the course of the next month, Wyatt Earp and his federal posse killed 3 men he believed were directly involved in Morgan's murder. Warrants were issued in Tucson, Arizona Territory for Wyatt Earp, Warren Earp, Doc Holliday, Sherman McMaster, and Jack Johnson for the murder of Frank Stillwell. By mid-April, the Vendetta posse had fled into New Mexico. In Silver City, they sold their horses and saddles and took a stagecoach to Deming. From there, they boarded a train to Albuquerque. Once at Albuquerque, Doc Holliday and Dan Tipton left the posse and traveled to Trinidad, Colorado, where they contemplated their next move.
Oh, I can't wait. We should definitely go there.
I know. I think this could be the town for us.
I heard that Doc Holliday was in town. Is that true?
Sitting right over there.
Is he dangerous?
I wouldn't fool with him.
What can I get for you, gentlemen?
I believe I'll have whiskey, Kentucky's best, if you have it.
I'll have a whiskey too, please, ma'am, and a water too, if you don't mind. I'm mighty parched. Thank you, ma'am.
The proprietor at the livery stable said there'd been quite a ruckus in here a few nights ago. Cockeyed Frank Lovin and John Allen apparently had some difficulties over a loan. It ended in a marksmanship contest in which Cockeyed Frank did not survive. Frank and John were sports from back in Dodge City.
Well, hopefully we can avoid the same difficulties.
Indeed.
Have you gentlemen decided on anything?
What would you recommend?
You gentlemen wouldn't happen to be Hilt, would you?
Bat?
Doc. No, don't get up, Doc. It's all right. Nice to see you.
Bat, I'd like you to meet a friend of mine, Dan Tipton.
Pleasure.
Dan, this is Bat Masterson
Pleasure.
from back in Dodge City. How you been, Bat?
I've been doing good.
What are you doing in Trinidad?
Well, I was appointed city marshal a few days ago. Jim is in town, too. I was out making my rounds and heard a rumor that Doc Holliday was in town, so I figured if you were in town, Doc, this would be the place that I'd find you. So, I've heard of the trouble you, Wyatt, and some of the others have gotten yourselves into. It's been in the papers for the last month. I was dreadful sorry to hear about Morgan, and I suppose Wyatt felt like he had no choice to do what he did.
Well, that would be a fair assessment. Barr and I released from custody after our little affray on Fremont Street last October. The justice system in Cochise County leaves much to be desired.
So what brings you two to Trinidad?
We just took the train up from Albuquerque. Obviously, things had gotten a little warm in Arizona, so we decided it might be a good time to take our leave.
So, what exactly happened in Tombstone? I mean, to Morgan, that is. I don't trust what I read in the papers.
Well, on Saturday evening, March 18th, Morgan, Dan, and I attended a play at Shefflin Hall called Stolen Kisses. It was truly delightful.
After that was over, Morgan wanted to play pool. Doc decided he was going to retire for the evening, so Morgan and I walked to Campbell and Hatch's and met Wyatt and Sherman McMaster's on the way. Morgan was playing a game with Bob Hatch, had his back to the door and bent over the table to take a shot. And someone fired 2 shots through that glass door. One hit Morgan in the back and the other right in the wall right above where Wyatt was sitting. Sherman McMaster's and some fellas ran out the back trying to figure out who the shooter was, and The rest of us carried Morg to the card room and laid him on the sofa. And he hung with us for about 45 minutes before we lost him.
Next day was Wyatt's 34th birthday. He and James spent it getting Morg's body to the train station in Benson, and then James took him the rest of the way back to their parents' home in Colton, California, so they could bury him.
It's a hell of a way to spend a birthday.
I've never seen a man more consumed by sadness and rage all at the same time. Something inside him just snapped when they killed Morgan. On Monday, March 20th, we took Verge and Allie to the train depot in Contention and then on to Tucson. Wyatt said he couldn't do what he needed to do and watch over them at the same time, so they went to California too.
So, who's we?
Me, Wyatt, Warren, Texas Jack Vermillion, Turkey Creek Jack Johnson, and Sherman McMaster. Wyatt had been appointed a deputy U.S. Marshal after Virgil got shot in December, so he deputized all of us. I tell you, I never thought I'd see the day that I'd be wearing a badge.
Here you are, gentlemen.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Can I get you something, Marshal?
Yes, a bottle of whiskey, please.
On the way to Contention, we got word that Frank Stillwell and Ike Clanton were in Tucson watching train cars come through. Texas Jack stayed in Contention with the horses, and the rest of us took Verge and Allie on to Tucson. When we got there that evening, we took a meal at the Porter Hotel, and on the way back to the train, Wyatt spotted Frank Stillwell. He chased the dirty, back-shooting coward down the tracks about 100 yards or so. Old Frank took both barrels of Wyatt's shotgun. Took the rest of us a minute to catch up, but when we got there, we gave him a few extra rounds just to make sure. And then we left his sorry carcass lying beside the tracks. We didn't get back to Tombstone until late Tuesday morning. Wyatt had everyone headquartered at the Cosmopolitan Hotel, so we went back to get our gear so we could leave town and look for the rest of Morg's killers. While we were packing, Wyatt got word that murder warrants had been issued for us in Tucson from the telegraph operator in town, but he told Wyatt he would keep it from Sheriff Behan long enough for us to finish getting our things together. So about 8 o'clock that evening, as we were leaving the Cosmopolitan, Johnny Behan, Billy Breckenridge, and Dave Neagle came walking up, and Johnny was all in a tizzy. He said, "Wyatt, I need to see you." Wyatt just looked at him and said, "Johnny, if you're not careful, you'll see me once too often." He brushed past him, we got on our horses and rode out of town.
You should have seen the look on their faces. Me and Charlie Smith joined the fellas later that afternoon.
I'm pretty sure that was a sight to see.
Camped that night and rode out to the Dragoons the next morning hunting Pete Spence at his work camp. When we got there, we found out Pete Spence had gotten word that we were hunting him and turned himself into Behan for protection.
That, and he had been named in the coroner's inquest into Morg's murder.
Charlie Smith and Sherman McMaster spoke Spanish to one of the workers, and he pointed out where Indian Charlie was hiding. And we rode out and found him and made sure he won't be playing lookout for any assassins anymore.
Indeed, he won't.
So, where was Johnny Behan in all this?
Johnny had been putting together a posse of honest ranchers, including Johnny Ringo, Finn Clanton, and John Barnes. They rode out to the Dragoons looking for us, but we were long gone by the time they got there, so they just rode back to town.
Wyatt sent me and Charlie Smith up to E.B. Gage to try to get a $1,000 loan, and Behan and Breckenridge spotted us and arrested us for resisting arrest because they said we walked past them at the Cosmopolitan, got on the horses, and rode off. But they never once spoke to us, tried to stop us or anything. Didn't matter. We made bail and they dropped the charges the next day.
So, did y'all get the money?
No, and we were in dire need of it by then. We were low on supplies and our horses were just about done in, so Wyatt made arrangements with some men named Craker and Wright to meet us in the mountains at Iron Springs with the money from Gage. Just before we got to the springs, Wyatt got off his horse and untied his shotgun. He told me later he had a strange feeling something wasn't right. Just as we crested the embankment above the springs, all hell broke loose. It seemed like gunfire was coming at us from every direction. Everybody but Wyatt turned and spurred their horses in retreat. Texas Jack's horse went down on top of him and we all thought he was dead. We couldn't see Wyatt from where we were because he had charged forward. He said as soon as the shooting started, he spotted Curly Bill Brocious and opened up on him with both barrels of his shotgun. Said it nearly cut him in half.
How in God's name was he not shot?
Wyatt Earp is the luckiest man I've ever known when it comes to getting shot at close distances. But I think we all would have been killed if God Almighty himself hadn't been on our side. After he shot Curly Bill, he tried to get back on his horse, but his gun belt had slipped down around his legs and his horse was in a wild panic. Somehow he managed to get it pulled back up and climb back on though, and he stopped long enough to grab Texas Jack on the way back to where we all had sought safety instead of certain death.
What, was he shot?
No, he didn't have a scratch on him. His saddle horn was shot off, his coattails were shredded with bullet holes, and he had taken a shot in the boot heel, but he was unscathed. Damnedest thing I ever saw.
All that, we still didn't get the money from Craker and Wright, so next day we rode back to town, and Wyatt was able to get a loan from a Wells Fargo detective, and the fellas rode out, and I just ended up staying back that night.
The next morning we rode up to Dragoon Summit Station and waited on the train from the west. It got there about 1 o'clock and we searched all the passenger cars for a friendly messenger, but we didn't find him. Late that afternoon we took a meal and fed our horses at the Percy place before we made a camp that night about a mile or so away. The next morning we rode up to Henry Hooker's ranch in the Sierra Bonita. Wyatt had known Hooker for a while and he had always been a supporter.
I was able to get about 1,000 for Wyatt. I had to take a stage and a train just to get close enough to ride up to Hooker's. And found out Lee Cooley had gotten some money too. We rode off and camped about 3 miles north of Hooker's hacienda. That morning, Behan and his honest ranchers were out looking for us everywhere except where we were.
Behan rode to Hooker's and inquired as to our whereabouts. Hooker told him he didn't know where we were and wouldn't tell him if he did. It was a sight watching them ride all around Hooker's ranch looking for us when they likely knew damn well exactly where we were.
Well, did they ever get close?
No, we stayed on at Hooker's for a few more days and Gage and Wells Fargo finally came through with $2,000. After talking to Lou Cooley, Wyatt started pondering his future as a vigilante and started making plans to leave Arizona. So on April 7th, we rode out to Camp Grant, only to find the commanding officer there, Colonel Biddle, was already aware of the warrants we had out for us. We figured the noose was about to start tightening around our necks, but the good colonel invited us in for supper instead. He excused himself while we finished eating, and after we were done, he was nowhere to be found. But there were fresh horses tied outside for us, and not being a bunch that could look a gift horse in the mouth, we made a hasty exit from the camp and rode out of Arizona to Silver City, New Mexico. Everybody but Charlie Smith sold the horses and saddles in Silver City. Charlie left the posse in Silver City. The rest of us took a stage to Deming, then a train to Albuquerque. Wyatt and I had a bit of a misunderstanding in Albuquerque, so Dan and I broke off from the rest of the fellows and made our way here.
So, where to now?
Well, we thought we might head up to Pueblo or maybe even Denver. And I wouldn't mind finding a nice quiet place to lay low for a while and maybe take in the horse races.
Doc and Dan traveled to Pueblo where they split company. Doc traveled by train to Denver to watch the horse races. Wyatt and Warren Earp, Sherman McMaster, Jack Johnson, and Texas Jack Vermillion made their way to Trinidad, where they separated. McMaster and Johnson went to Leadville, where they both had brothers. Wyatt and Warren Earp and Texas Jack traveled to Pueblo, where they reunited with Dan Tipton, and from there the four men went to Gunnison, where they set up camp for the summer. Doc had many more adventures and lived out most of his remaining years in Colorado, eventually ending up in Glenwood Springs. Doc and Wyatt had their final meeting in a Denver hotel lobby sometime between June 7, 1886 and August 3, 1886. John Henry Holliday died at the Hotel Glenwood on November 8, 1887, at the age of 36.